Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan and welcome to my detailed review of the PlayStation 5 version of Blizzard Entertainment's Diablo IV. Thank you for your patience, by the way. I was busy with a very important freelance project earlier this month, so this review got pushed back a little bit, and I also wanted to take my time and try to really enjoy the experience without rushing through it. So, did I enjoy the experience? Well, let me put it to you this way. Diablo IV is hella fun. It's damn good. It's sinisterly silly? Wait, no it's not. Diablo IV actually returns to its darker, more serious look and feel, and although normally I prefer games with bright colors and a smattering of humor, Diablo IV's more somber presentation works really well here. So much so that I'm putting out a call to action early in my review. Now that I'm finished with the main story campaign as a sorceress, I'll talk about my build a little later on. What class should I try next? Let me know in the comment section below. And while you're doing that, if you like this video, please like and subscribe and click that little bell, and I'll be sure to bring you more gaming goodness in the future. Thank you. So with that, let me get into the nitty-gritty of why I enjoyed Diablo IV and why I think even people who have never played a Diablo game would really enjoy it. Diablo IV takes place in the beautiful, seriously the graphics are very pretty, but bleak world of Sanctuary, where an ongoing war between angels and demons has been going on for centuries, and poor humanity is sort of caught in the middle of all of it. That is until a demon named Lilith offers humanity a way out of the cycle. If they help her take over Sanctuary and defeat her own personal enemies, which I won't spoil here, the eternal conflict can end and humanity can live in Sanctuary as she envisions, meaning rules it. Of course, making a deal with the devil, any devil, comes with caveats, and usually doesn't work out for people, especially when they give in to their more sinister nature. Thus, it's up to the last of the Haradrim, an ancient order tasked with protecting Sanctuary, to stop Lilith. But their numbers are few and tired, and they can't do it alone. They need you, the Wanderer, a customizable hero belonging to one of 5 job classes that you choose at the beginning of the game: Barbarian, Rogue, Druid, Sorcerer, or Necromancer. I chose Sorcerer, and I'll go into detail about why I think that's a must-play class soon, I promise. At any rate, the Wanderer is happily not a silent protagonist. The voice actress for my Sorceress, for example, does a good job with a main character. And throughout his or her journey, they're accompanied by a genuinely likable cast of characters, also voiced by some very talented actors. Now, I admit the main campaign is pretty straightforward, and I was a little bit disappointed that the final act felt rushed and a little anticlimactic in places. But the reason I still really enjoyed the story is it poses interesting questions about the black and white nature of good and evil. Is it really so simple? Or is the world more morally ambiguous than that? For example, the angelic being Inarius comes across as aloof and self-absorbed, while Lilith seems to take her role as quote-unquote Mother of Sanctuary very seriously. So long as people obey her and fall into line, she's willing to let them be a part of the new world she wants to create. Thus it makes you wonder, who's really the bad guy here? Or to put it another way, are there any good guys and girls out there? Well, there is one, your hero, whose job it is to walk, ride, and fast travel across the impressively massive world of Sanctuary in search of a way to stop Lilith and save the world. Okay, I know I just said there's one hero, but that's not quite accurate. There's actually a lot of other heroes fighting in the vicinity, and they're not NPCs. You see, Diablo IV is entirely online, and while running around Sanctuary listening to the pretty but mostly subtle soundtrack, you'll see a lot of other players wandering around as well. It's very much like an MMO in that regard, and like in an MMO, you can either join a clan to roll with, or join up with random strangers during world events, where everybody gathers to defeat waves of enemies and get some sweet loot. You don't have to do these things, by the way, you can just ignore other players, although I have to say, these events do get much easier when you have some good allies by your side. Now, I admit I don't see the need for Diablo IV to have MMO-esque features, and I don't know why you can't just play the main story campaign offline if you want to. But the good news is I had very little issues with connectivity, the queues to get into the game, for me at least, were extremely short, and the presence of other players was fairly unobtrusive. Of course, the latter could be because I also play Final Fantasy XIV, which has millions of players around the world, and so towns and main hubs are full to bursting with myriad warriors of light. Compared to that, Diablo IV feels practically empty, but not too empty. There are plenty of Diablo fans online, and there's plenty to do with or without them. Exploring Sanctuary is practically practically a full-time job in and of itself, as the map is pretty darn big, and there's lots of dungeons and hovels and towns and villages and hideaways to discover. But most of what you'll be doing as you attempt to track down Lilith and her minions is fight mobs and mobs of enemies like bandits, scorpions, squirmy worms, and even the undead. And this is where we get into the best part of Diablo IV, the combat and customization features. What I love about the combat is how straightforward plug-and-play it is. This is a great game to introduce to people who aren't overly familiar with action RPGs because it's easy to understand. Essentially, you just run around enemies, point your character in their direction, and smash your way through a series of face buttons and shoulder buttons, which when pressed unleash different attacks or defensive skills. There's no input lag or need to wait for elaborate animations before you make your next move, so attacks are fluid yet snappy at the same time. Better yet, Diablo IV is famous for being a giant loot game, so not only is it quick and easy to get through a mob fight, but enemies explode in oodles of money and valuable items, so you always feel like you're being rewarded for your efforts. Loot, mainly weapons and armor, is color-coded and categorized by rarity, from common to legendary and the occasionally elusive unique, and also get into later, each piece of armor or weapon you collect is incredibly customizable. But for people totally new to games, they can just drop one item for a better item and be on their merry way. The combat and loot system is just that simple. But let's go a little bit deeper and talk about all the ways you can create an unstoppable, bone-crushing hero via smart class builds and optimal customization, which there's a nice variety of. Okay, so now let's talk about my sorceress Liliana. And yes, she is named for a Dragon Age character. Now usually I'm one of those boring people who's more comfortable being a Jill of all trades, master of none, so that I'm never in a position where I might need a certain type of spell or ability and whoops, I don't have it. But then I read online that having a build that focuses on ice or lightning is the way to go, so my sorceress build focused mostly on ice and lightning abilities. And guys, I have to tell you, I don't know if mine was quote-unquote the right build, but it sure worked for me. If you want to be an epic spellcaster like my wandering hero, one of the first spells I highly recommend you learn and max out is the Chain Lightning ability. This spell is fantastic for crowd control, and you will be mobbed by hordes and hordes of enemies all throughout the game. This shockingly good spell, see what I did there, causes lightning bolts to fly from your hands and bounce around enemies like a ping pong ball, doing a good amount of damage. Of course, this spell takes a good chunk of mana, which is needed to use magic, and thus you can only spam it maybe 2 or 3 times in a row, but hey, your mana does replenish over time, and there are modifiers that can shorten the amount of time it takes for magic to recharge, so it's not too long before you can spam this spell again. And while waiting to spam it, you can teleport about the map and shock any enemies around you, which is not only fun, but a good way to evade attacks, in addition to the dodge button, which is really handy, even though it has a brief cooldown. But what I really loved was building up my ice spells. Chaining together spells like Frost Nova, which freezes enemies in place, Blizzard, which is a small area of attack spell that can also freeze enemies in place, and my ultimate skill, Deep Freeze, which not only makes my sorceress untouchable for a few seconds, but does massive amounts of damage to mobs and bosses alike, makes me practically invincible on the battlefield. On top of that, I could pair my Ice Armor skill, which for a small portion of health encases my hero in protective ice, with defensive effects like magical barriers to negate enemy fire for several seconds. This trick was especially helpful when I accidentally walked into the final boss fight way underleveled. Doing that was not wise or easy, but eventually with all my magic barriers, spells, and a little bit of level grinding and reshuffling of my passive skills, I was able to claim victory over the forces of evil. For now. The ending has kind of a twist, and I'll be interested to see where the story goes from here on out. But how was I able to acquire all these skills and abilities? Well, to learn nifty skills, all you have to do is fight monsters and level up. Once you do, you can go to your character's skill tree and spend skill points unlocking new spells, modifiers, and passive abilities that make your offensive and defensive skills more potent. And hey, if you find you don't like your build, you can reset your skill tree for a cost. But even better is that you can boost your skills and abilities significantly by tinkering with your equipment. And this is where customizing all your loot gets pretty darn fun. Now, just so you know, you'll be getting a lot of loot, and your inventory can only hold so much. So quick tip, I always try to make space for rare and legendary items and mostly left common items alone after the opening hours of the game. And the reason I did this is because Diablo 4 actually encourages you to hang on to more valuable items because you can upgrade and modify them pretty much however you want. And if you're unsure of what to keep and what to discard, you can go into town and stash your items in a chest for later inspection and use. And while you're in town, it's here you can do all sorts of combat preparation. You can upgrade and replenish healing potions, buy weapons and armor, which why bother, you're getting good stuff on the battlefield anyway. Use special currency to roll for extremely rare weapons and armor, and repair and upgrade your gear. So how to modify your gear so you're unstoppable? Well, let's start at the blacksmith, where you can use resources and money left on the battlefield to simply improve the stats of your weapons and armor so they're a little more powerful. And if you don't need an item, you can scrap it for valuable resources which can be used for better upgrades. And what I like is that if you like the look of a staff or a helmet but don't need the actual item anymore, scrapped items will be saved in a wardrobe that you can access at any time to change your look without having to use inferior gear. Think of the glamour system in Final Fantasy XIV, but way easier and intuitive to use. But there's more that you can do. Some weapons and armor come with an item slot that can hold special loot like precious gems and even skulls that further beef up your equipment. If you don't have precious gems or a slot to put them in, you can visit the jeweler who for a price will make these things for you. But wait, there's more awesome ways to upgrade your hero, and they're called aspects. Aspects are unique class modifiers that are earned by completing special dungeons scattered throughout Sanctuary. These dungeons, by the way, are pretty challenging, so just be aware that you will be earning your aspects. Once you do, you can go to an occultist who will imprint an aspect onto a piece of gear, making it even more powerful and useful in battle. For example, one of my favorite defensive aspects is Aspect of the Protector, which summons a protective barrier for 10 seconds whenever I damage an elite, that is tough, enemy. Another cool thing that the occultist can do is extract an aspect from, say, a legendary weapon you no longer need so that you can imprint it on a more useful piece of equipment. And the occultist can swap out and affix a stat modifier attached to gear for another one, so yeah, there's lots of ways to customize your kit and be the most powerful hero in all of Sanctuary. Of course, all this modifying takes a lot of rare resources and money, so it's best to save these upgrades for rare or legendary or unique items. If I have any complaints about all this customization, and there is one very minor one, it's that you can't do all of these upgrades in one convenient place. You constantly have to walk or ride back and forth between shops to do all of it, which is slightly annoying. But that's okay, towns are pretty small and buildings are close together, so it's not that big of a deal. And that's essentially the core of Diablo 4, running around fighting enemies, collecting loot, upgrading and customizing said loot, and then going back out and doing it all over again, either as a lone wolf or with friends. It's a really satisfying, fun gameplay loop, and even if you're not a huge RPG fan, I highly recommend trying out Diablo 4. Speaking of trying things out, again, if you enjoy a particular class in Diablo 4 and think I should give it a try, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. See you later.